Once again, I'd like to welcome you to our 21st Thrive, Not Just Survive seminar. It is always an honor, a privilege, and a pleasure for me to be together with you doctors who are going to save American medicine. We're at an extremely difficult time in our history, and I'd like to take a few minutes to remind you of an even perhaps more difficult time that we were in before, back in 1895. When our country had lost more than 500,000 people, much of the country lay in ruins. A very important talk, perhaps one of the most important ones in American history, was given at the Atlanta Cotton States and International Exposition in Atlanta by Booker T. Washington, perhaps the first black man ever to address the Atlanta Exposition. One of the things an example he gave, I think it's been quoted many times, is that a ship was lost at sea for many days, suddenly sighted a friendly vessel. From the mast of the unfortunate vessel was seen a signal, "Water, water, we are dying of thirst." The answer from the friendly vessel at once came back, "Cast down your bucket where you are." A second time the signal, "Water, water, send us water," ran up from the distressed vessel and was answered, "Cast down your bucket where you are." And the third and fourth signal for water was answered, "Cast down your bucket where you are." The captain of the distressed vessel, at last heeding the injunction, cast down his bucket, and it came up full of fresh sparkling water from the mouth of the Amazon River. Well, today, I'd like to make a few observations about that friendly vessel, which may be the U.S. government, it may be the hospital that has promised to hire you, it may be the managed care cartel, and it is a pirate vessel. Any provisions that it has, it stole. And what it wants to do is board your ship and commandeer your vessel, your cargo, and your crew. So we need to be very, very careful about that. Another thing that Booker T. Washington wrote about a lot in his book, Up from Slavery, which really every American ought to read, was the dangers to his people, and really to everybody's people, of trying to live by your wits, of trying to become an operator, of just getting in, figuring out how to manipulate people and get what you want that way, as opposed to learning how to do something useful, tilling a field, building something, all of these things that was the way up from slavery. And he told his people that you will prosper in proportion as we learn how to draw the line between the superficial and the substantial, the ornamental gewgaws of life and the useful. So I think all of you here are involved in doing something useful, but our profession is being crushed by the healthcare industry, which is living by its wits, get fancy degrees and learn how to do all this coding and so on. We supposedly live in this knowledge economy, knowledge of things that aren't particularly useful. And I think it's been pointed out by several people that the so-called healthcare industry devotes 40% of the huge amount of cash coming through it to shuffling money around, to doing things that are not recognizable as any type of medical services. And that's before you get to the first unnecessary motorized wheelchair, the first unnecessary spine surgery, the first unnecessary prescription. 40% is dominated by the parasites who are trying to push us around and tell us what to do. Well, I think this is probably a bipartisan affair, and while we're basking in rejoicing over the results of the midterm election, I'd like to remind you about a previous midterm election when the Republicans took over both houses of Congress. That happened in 1994. The Clinton plan was defeated. What did the Republican Congress do? They imported a huge portion of the Clinton plan into something called HIPAA and passed it. Stuffed it into a bill that was supposed to be about portability of insurance if you lost your job. From a 30-page bill, it became 300 pages. Republicans disavowed any knowledge of what was in it. And the worst parts of Clinton plan were in there, including the criminalization of American medicine and this pretense at privacy, which was going to serve as the excuse for allowing all of these electronic health records. So that was the Republicans' gift. Oh, the other thing that was in there, and I never say SGR without prefacing with the Clinton-Gingrich sustained growth rate. That was a gift to us from the Republicans. And there was another gift in around 1973 in the HMO Act, which was trying to repair the damage caused to our country by the passage of Medicare. So we turned a one-party disaster into a bipartisan disaster. And neither party seems to understand two basic problems that are at the root of the explosion in medical costs and in the problems people are having getting medical care. That is third-party payment, where somebody is responsible for the bill other than the patient, and then in wage and price controls. When do we hear either party talking about those two things? Well, wage and price controls are simply evil. They have been tried for 40 centuries with always the same results. They never give us lower actual prices for goods that we need. They always bring us corruption and misery, whether enacted by the Roman Emperor Diocletian or by Hitler, who thought that that's what his secret police was for, was to keep people from charging too much, or for the Allies in the occupation who kept imposing wage and price control until a guy named Ludwig Erhard came along. And boy, do we ever need a Ludwig Erhard here in our country. He was a professor of economics who, when he got to be Minister of the Finance, just canceled the wage and price control to the consternation of the Allies, or whether it was to Mr. Richard Wage and Price Controls Nixon, or to CMS today with this elaborate ICD-10 and all this stuff for shuffling money around and trying to determine the value of our services. So medical care costs too much, and it costs too much because of all of this overlay. And medical care is unavailable because for all the money that's poured into the system, there's so much misallocation of resources because of these wage and price controls. Republicans even talk about getting rid of those things. What they are doing is talking about economizing, completely not looking at the 40%, but looking at the physicians and the patients, and focusing especially on end of life. And people think, oh, they're talking about if you have terminal cancer or something like that, you don't want to have all those tubes and anything. But what they're really talking about is useless eaters. They're talking about end of life as a verb, and I think many of us are seeing this over and over again today. They're talking about patients who could be restored to their previous state of health with some things like fluids, oxygen, antibiotics, what we call during our residency, toning, and instead they're ending up, with their consent, the hospital is deciding to send them over to hospice. So, and what is happening here is that the death panel is becoming the doctor. The patient-physician relationship is being destroyed. Medical ethics are being turned upside down. The incentives in the system are set up in this managed care cartel, which all of our supposedly free market friends think is a free market, is putting the incentives in the hand of the doctor to kill our patients or to ration their care, deny care, and turning us into an agent of the state for cutting back on these useless eaters instead of what is our duty and our responsibility. The answer to this is not coming from Washington, D.C. The answer to this is coming from us just doing it for the free market, for preserving our profession, preserving our patients, and it's happening in Wichita, in Oklahoma City, in Atlanta, in Phoenix, in Coos Bay, Oregon, in Virginia, in Vermont, and all these places where your doctors are from. And it really is up to us. We cannot wait for that friendly vessel to rescue us because that's not what they're coming for. Thank you.